You heard of this podcast or taken a look at the list of who's on there? Because you may know some of the people.
I definitely looked at the list. Honestly, I hadn't heard of it, so I was glad to know about it, and I'm going to share that with others. Because the conversations that I have with Jeff Galloway or just some of the older folk from the late 70s or early 80s, there's a romantic air to that group. Time's gone by, certainly running slow is one of the reconciliations that we all have to make. That is just how it is. I saw Mark Muggleton was in there, and that was curious. Hadn't thought about him for quite a while. It's really fun to go back and reflect on some of those races that did my undergraduate at Virginia Military Institute. And one of our arch rivals at the time was William and Mary. They were just up to the top of the roof with great distance athletes. Whenever you could knock off some of them, it was a great day.
Yeah.
Yeah, same thing was true with West Virginia and Carl Hatfield. I could stay with him for a few miles and then we were all toast. He was just so good. He's an interesting guy, certainly was an interesting competitor. We're very close in age. The times that I competed against him, he was a worthy competitor as an announcer, a TV guy, and so on. I had occasion to bump into him periodically. He was usually an invited athlete just because of his notoriety. There was a race in the late 80s in West Virginia. He would be there. And once you got him going, he was nonstop.
Yeah.
And he could recall in great detail every element of a race, whereas I couldn't remember what I had for breakfast. There he would be more demure because he was a great athlete, but now he's around the creme de la creme. He was grateful to be included. So you're right. He could write a great book. He should. It shouldn't be just another autobiography, though. It should be more about lifestyle and how he's managed his life.
Yeah.
He's got a fulsome career and I believe he got his doctorate. He's done a lot of interesting things. He's not some country bumpkin at all.
He started out as a descendant of the feud. So,
We always joked with him about being one of the Hatfields, and there was a guy named Brian McCoy that I went to high school with, but I always used to chide him about Hatfields and McCoys.
Welcome to Running in the 70s, where we interview, meet, and get to know athletes of all kind who were running in the 70s. I'm your host, Matthew Kleinowski.
today on the podcast, we're back in Colorado. You just might recognize his voice and his face if you've been racing over the years. Somebody who's been running now for more than 50 years, an accomplished runner, an accomplished race director, race manager, and somebody we haven't talked to yet, a race announcer. Let's talk today. Welcome and meet Creigh Kelley. Hi, Creigh.
Good morning, Matthew. It's great to be here. And I always enjoy reflection. My significant other, Renee Hamilton, and I will sit and have a cocktail and I'll say, I look back, how did all these decades just scream by? But look at all the fun things. And then sometimes I just wish I were very simple and didn't have all this complication in my life. Would life go by more slowly? Would I enjoy things even more? And I said, but I'm stuck with who I am. It's great. Great to be on your podcast. And this is going to be fun.
Let's talk about your origin story as a competitor or runner. How, when, and why did you become a runner?
That is such a curious story. Westport, Connecticut. My family was very modest means. Moved there when I was 8 years old. We lived on a little saltwater tidal pond, the Mill Pond, down by the Old Mill Beach. And it was idyllic in terms of being a kid because there was a pond right behind my house that we could go and row a boat on or canoe. I found my way into being a juvenile delinquent pretty quickly. Was proud of being the leader of a small gang of kids. And I was difficult for my parents. This was right up till I was about 12 years old or so. I was in 10th grade in the spring of my sophomore year. And I had joined a gang. The gangs were very different back then. They were social, but they also was all about fighting. And you meet up after school and have a fight, or not a rumble classically, but one-on-one. And I was a skinny kid. My dad was a corporal in the Marine Corps in the Second World War, and he was concerned that I wouldn't be able to defend myself. So he took me down to the local YMCA and had me take boxing lessons with the sole purpose of making sure I could defend myself. This was awesome because as soon as those lessons were over, I went down to the beach, picked on the bully that always picked on me and broke his nose. In my sophomore year, I was going out to the parking lot at Staples High School to have a fight. My gang against another gang. I was a pointed hitter. One of the coolest guys in the school also was a member of our gang. It was really odd because he's really popular and I was nothing. And he said, "You're not fighting today." I said, "What do you mean? I got to fight." And he goes, "No, you're going out for track." I said, "What's track?" He said, "Just follow me." So we went to the locker room, got my gym uniform on, your sneakers and shorts and shirt. We went down to the track and I said, "What am I supposed to do?" He said, "You'll figure it out." The coach, who just died this past year, Coach Lane, Paul Lane, amazing man. He was the football coach and also the track coach. He said, "What are you here for, son?" And I said, and we always said, "Sir, ma'am." I said, "Track, sir." He goes, "Which event?" I said, "Track, sir." And he literally said, "You're going to be a distance runner. So I want you to go warm up and be back here in 5 minutes. You're going to be running the mile." And I said, "How do you warm up?" He said, "Just run around for a little bit." This is really the truth. I went to his house to talk to him a few years ago during one of my high school reunions, and he reflected on all of this. He remembered it. And he said, "You're going to run the mile." And I said, "How far is that?" He said, "You see that road around the football field? You'll run around that 4 times." All right. I ran a 5:45 mile. And he said, "You're on the team." And that was the beginning of it. That was the God wink when my buddy Kevin Cunningham insisted I go out for track, something I had no knowledge of. And so it began. And fast forward, by the end of my senior year, I took 5th in the state in the 2 mile. Amby Burfoot was in that race. He insists that he was first, but I'm pretty confident he was second. Now, there was another guy that was better, Bob Beardsley, I think his name. We were only about 6 seconds apart. And he went on to Wesleyan. I went on to VMI. And I only went to VMI because my mother went to Sweetbriar. And so she wanted me to look at Virginia schools. So I applied to 4 or 5 of them and on the waiting list at UVA and waiting list at WNL. But VMI wanted to talk to me. And they had just built an indoor track that was one of the best in the country. It was a rubberized asphalt, 4 lanes in the straights, and it was just a beautiful track. And they took me around and showed me that. And I said, "I heard this military stuff might be a little daunting." They said, "Oh, you're in great shape. You'll have no trouble." I cried the whole first week I was there. That was the genesis. This guy telling me, because he recalled that I would run with them to go to play baseball. I didn't have a bike because I couldn't afford a bike. So I would just run along with the guys as they rode their bikes. And he remembered that. And I saw him at my most recent reunion. And Renee went up to this guy, Kevin, and said, "What you did that moment shaped his entire life. But you didn't know it at the time, but it did."
That's amazing. Let me just get this on the calendar. What year was that, your sophomore year? And what town were you in?
Let's see. Westport, Connecticut is part of Fairfield County. It's a very wealthy county. The school is one of the best in the country, public schools. There's a class of about 500 kids when we graduated. The year I graduated high school in 64, so that was probably 62.
What happened to your gang participation
It
after
was
you
what
started track?
it just evaporated. I suddenly was being cross associated with it, took up all my time. Now, what I didn't tell you was that I was a smoker. Even as a sophomore, I was a smoker. And I remember coach saying to me, "Son, do you smoke?" And I said, "Yes, sir." And he goes, "Well, you can't smoke if you're on the team." I said, "Yes, sir." So I stopped, but I continued to smoke sometimes in the summers. I just didn't smoke while I was on the team. And that was acceptable. Nobody seemed to be particularly care about that. Even when I was at VMI in the summers, I would smoke sometimes and get back in shape and so on. And I regret that. I sincerely regret that. I think I would have been a significantly better athlete had I not done that, but it was acceptable and nobody was telling me I couldn't.
But yeah, that's neat to have that event that was one of probably several life-changing events, but such a significant one.
It was.
No longer a ganger and a fighter. How was the transition to I'm a competitor and I'm a runner during your high school career? And how were you as a student?
Two things happened. One, I became a better student. Two, I'd always been a competitor, whether it was getting in a fight and wanting to win. I always wanted to be better. Once I got into running, I really wanted to be a good runner. And my parents had zero interest in my running. My dad would drive me over to AU meets in the summertime sometimes, but my mother, God bless her, both of them gone, they just had zero interest in my running. They wouldn't come to my track meets. Even when I was at VMI and I was school record holder and captain of teams, they never, ever saw me compete. My dad did take me to the state championship in Connecticut. For the most part, that was not of interest. What was of interest to them was going to college. You're going to go to college. You're going to study. And I was incredibly indifferent to studying. I tested really well. I was always able to get C's and B's without much trouble. But when it came to the college testing, I excelled way above. And my parents always lamented, said, if you just study, you do so well. And when I got to VMI, it was an intensely competitive atmosphere. So I was suited for that. You could yell at me, you could do whatever you wanted, but I'll find my way through this craziness. At Staples High School, I was a little bit surprised that I would be elected co-captain of the cross-country team. Why me? I never saw any leadership component in self-reflection. Others did, but I didn't. And it was always surprising to me. Why me?
Let me ask you one more psychological
Sure.
reflection. It's on competition. If you're in a fight and you lose, it's different than coming in second in track race. How did you handle losing or disappointing performances once you got into competitive racing?
That's a good question. It was always frustrating to me. Really liked winning when I did. But what I did realize and what was important to me being part of a team was, yeah, it's an individual sport running. But on the other hand, I'm part of a team. So I would run multiple events. I'd run the mile and the 2 mile. And by doing that, I would create a lot of points by getting second or third, better than just winning one event. That also happened in college. I ended up happily running in multiple events. I would literally run, back then it was the 3 mile, but I'd run the steeple and the 3 mile. And I can only imagine what I would have done had I focused on what I didn't. The point was, I always wanted to help my team. At the end of my freshman year at Virginia Military Institute, the track team's, 80, 100 kids. I was respectable, but I wasn't the fastest. But they did an election of the honorary captain of the freshman track team. And here I am from Connecticut, a northern town in a very southern college. And I was elected the honorary captain of the track team, which was much to the horror of the track coach at the time because he didn't really like me. I was always surprised, but I was grateful that I found that competing, as long as I put in my best effort and it was for the team, that was what psychologically made me feel like a champion.
That's brilliant. This is just why I love doing these things. Everybody's going to relate to so much. When I talk about it myself, there's those surprises that happen. And you
Yeah.
say, what's going on here? Is that me still? At what point did you say, you know what? They can't all be wrong all the time. I need to embrace leadership.
Because I went to a military college and VMI has been around since 1839. I knew that I was forced into competition. I'm not talking about running. I'm talking just in general. You had to strive for excellence or they'd kick you out. It was a harsh environment. And I needed exactly that. I absolutely needed that discipline in my life. I was disciplined as a runner, but I wasn't disciplined as an individual. I floated along the first 3 years. I was a good runner. I even set a school record. It wasn't that good. At the time, it was good. I was cranking. But then you go to something called summer camp. Summer camp was basically boot camp for third lieutenants. You're not a lieutenant yet. You will be a lieutenant in another year. This was during the Vietnam War. So summer camp was important. That's where you're either going to sink or swim. Up to that point, even the military leadership at VMI were shaking their heads at me because, oh my God, this guy just won't shine his shoes enough. He won't do this. He won't do that. But I guess he's a good athlete. So whatever. And he's squeaking through. I got to summer camp. Now you're competing against all the ROTC kids in the nation from different elements, different states, but you're all crammed together. I ended up embracing that lifestyle. I became a barracks barber. I cut hair covertly at VMI, got caught a couple of times, but I made money that way. And I immediately set up a barbershop in the latrine of our barracks building and had to do a deal with one of the regular Army sergeants that was overseeing us, that I would split my earnings with him. When it came to leadership, I got it. I figured it out, how to lead a patrol. I can remember running the mile in combat boots in under 5-minute mile in under 5 minutes. And it was like a camp record and everybody was stunned. How could he do that? I came out being what they call distinguished military student. I got back to VMI as a senior and everybody was shocked. The military leadership, the actual Army officers were just, but they had nothing to do with it. I had found my way to being a leader. I was also co-captain of the track and the cross country team my senior year. I just figured it out. Okay, I can do this and people will follow me. And with that comes great responsibility. And of course, by the December of 69, I was heading to Vietnam as a young lieutenant. That's what happened. I didn't know I was. I didn't realize I was. My mother's brother was a West Point graduate and got the Silver Star in the Second World War and ended up vice president of CBS. Amazing man. I always looked at him in awe. But the reality was, we were brought up in a certain way, very disciplined way. And you were accountable for your sins. If I made a mistake, the worst words you could ever hear was wait till your father gets home. And I heard that often, but I stood up to it. I wanted to be a leader. I just didn't know it yet.
Before we move on to what happened at the end of your college career, let's talk about whatever you remember of running, equipment, facilities, coaching.
In high school, we didn't have a real distance coach. The head coach was Paul Lane, an amazing man. He died when he was 96. I saw him in 21, but he was the track coach, the whole Mamu. A cross country coach was a student teacher from Yale. And these guys, they really weren't runners. So we had no coaching. I think they probably pulled out some old book on how to run. Even at VMI, frankly, there was a coach Martin was the distance coach, but we didn't have a coach like William and Mary did. They had these great coaches that were focused on distance running. We didn't have that at all. So it was catch as catch can. However, when you go back to looking at the shoes that we wore, we called our training shoes flats. They were training flats. And I remember I had to go down to Chip Schaefer's. Funny, I can remember this. Schaefer's Sporting Goods in downtown Westport, Connecticut, a town of like 25,000 people still. They seemed so light, but originally we ran in women's tennis shoes, basically. Those white flat tennis shoes. That's what we ran in. And then we got into the spikes. We got the long spikes. So we had cinder tracks. I remember the coolest pair of shoes that I got my senior year at VMI were Adidas 99s. And Adidas 99s were a sprinter's shoe. And we wanted the lightest shoe possible. We never once thought about padding in a shoe. I'm looking at the backdrop. I can't tell if those are waffle trainers.
Yeah, those are the waffle racers we used on grass courses.
I know I see them. Until I got to VMI, I never had a real pair of running shoes, cross-country shoes, trail shoes, none of that at VMI. You had your racing spikes for track because it's still cinder track. And then indoors, we wore the very short spikes because it was a rubberized asphalt. But cross-country, they were specific. We called them cross-country shoes. They were so light, we thought that was great.
So far, we've been talking all through the 1960s. Running was about to change dramatically in the North American continent. By the time you left VMI, apart from knowing the competitors in your local colleges, what was your worldview of running, and had you paid any attention to it?
Yeah, I very much was following Jim Ryan. I thought he was amazing. And that anybody could run that fast was extraordinary. Obviously, my world changed just like that because in 68, after I finished at VMI, my whole attention was, I'm going to war. I could see that train wreck coming right at us. But we all did. I wasn't worried about it. I just knew it was inevitable. This is what's going to happen. So running was right in the back. I started smoking again. Of course, they gave us free cigarettes in Vietnam. I didn't get wounded, but I was in combat. I just was so grateful that I was in such great shape from VMI and running. I could see contemporaries of mine really struggling. Yeah, I smoked, but my endurance level, putting on 50 pounds on my back and going into the jungle and walking long distances when it was sweltering, it didn't bother me. I was tired, but not exhausted. And I was grateful for running. But the rest of the world of running, I ignored. When I got out of Vietnam, I went right to Germany, at that time, West Germany. And I was with 1st Infantry Division Forward, and I became a captain. And I was what you would think of classically as a company commander, but in the artillery, you call it battery commander. I would run my troops. I still smoked, run my troops. And I just loved the fact that I could do that. The Olympics were coming up in 1972 in Munich.
Right.
We were given free tickets to go to the Olympics. I could use them or I could give them, and I gave them to some of my troops because I thought that'd be exciting for them. But I was following the Olympics. We would watch on these little black and white TVs what was going on. And that really changed the face of running when obviously the Munich massacre and then Shorter winning the gold. So I was curious and interested about that. I remember noticing that Amby Burfoot won Boston in 68. And I thought that was interesting that he did that. And I wonder what I could do someday in a marathon if I ever chose to do it, but it didn't strike me as particularly interesting. My worldview went from nothing to the Olympics in 72 to pretty much nothing again. Then I got out in 73. I left the military. They wanted me to stay in, but it was no longer particularly interesting to me. I'd been there, done that. I got some awards and so on. And what's next? What's the next adventure? And I ended up in Atlanta, Georgia, where one of the lieutenants that was a friend of mine from Germany had ended up, was still smoking. I don't know if you remember, we used to have a coffee table in the living room. We'd built a house. I was doing really well in this company that had nothing to do with running. I used to order magazines because I wanted to look fairly erudite, sophisticated, and so on. So you put these magazines on the coffee table next to the ashtrays. One of them was a medical magazine, like Scientific American, but it wasn't that. It was something else. My wife and I had just found out that she was pregnant with our first child. This is 75. I was reading this magazine like the next day after we found out. And there's an article about don't smoke around pregnant women. And I went, what the heck? I went to her and I said, we have to stop smoking because we were both smoking. And she said, why? I said, look, read this. It's bad. It could hurt the fetus. And we don't want to do that. She said, all right. I was smoking like a pack and a half a day. I quit just like that. I literally quit. And no withdrawal, nothing, because it was purposeful. So I went into my closet and found my training flats from VMI. You can only imagine curled up. They didn't look as pristine as those Nike racers behind you. And I got them out. I put them on and went down to a local track. I just need to start getting back into shape. I might as well start running since I'm not smoking. I can run now. It won't feel bad. I started to do repeat quarters, 440s, and it was a disaster. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't run a 70-second quarter. So I decided I need to find out a little bit more about how to do this properly. I belonged to a tennis racket club. One of the guys that I'd played some racquetball with, I was telling him, man, I just got back into running. It was a disaster. He said, you should go down to the local running store here in Atlanta. I said, what's a running store? He says, it's a store for runners. It's just for runners. That's interesting. I should do that. Maybe I can get a pair of shoes. So I did. And it was named Fidipides, owned by Jeff Galloway, 72 Olympian, who had gone to Wesleyan, who had run with Amby Burfoot. The whole thing was ironic to me. But he'd also been in the Olympics in 72, but I didn't know any of that. I didn't know it was him. So I go into this running store and here's all these skinny guys. And they turned out to be Benji Durden, Jeff Galloway, 2 or 3 other guys that you would know the names of immediately. I said, I need to get a pair of running shoes. By another Godwink, it was Jeff Galloway who helped me. The other guys are too egocentric time. Anyway, Jeff helps me. He says, you should get this pair of Nike Roadrunners. They're only $19.99. I went, wow, that's a lot of money, but okay. I was completely honest with him. I just started running again. It's really hard for me. And I need some guidance. Is there any guidance you have? He said, why don't I just coach you?
Wow.
I said, what? He said, you call me every week. I'll give you your workouts. I'm like, great. Sure. I, and this wasn't for pay. I was just going to get coached. I thought, what a nice thing for him to do. I joined the Atlanta Track Club because of him. This was in 75. And I'd been smoking for 7 years now. I was just taken by the whole concept of training. Because for the first time, here's a structured workout to do, not just that some coach posted on bulletin board. And I began to get better. I never would ever be the runner I was in college because I'd done too much damage, I think, to my lungs. But I was starting to run under 36 minutes for a 10K. I went, wow, I can run faster than 6 minutes a mile now. And I was satisfied with that. But as we got more and more into it, I started to get excited about this concept of a running store. One day, he called me. It was a Saturday. He said, do you have time to come down to the store? I want to introduce you to somebody. And I said, sure. By this time, I knew he was a famous guy and he'd written books, was really extraordinary person. So I go down and it's John Parker. John Parker, he'd run on the Florida Track Club with Frank Shorter and some of the other really notable guys. John Parker was writing his book, Once a Runner. I don't know if you ever read it.
Of course.
Yeah. So
Everybody needs to read that book. Who's a runner? Yeah.
it's still relevant today. We go to this little restaurant next door, a pizza place, and he's got the galley sheets. The people of our generation know where galley sheets are. Today, you wouldn't, but these long sheets. And he and Jeff were going over paragraphs, editing. And of course, my undergraduate degree was in English. My graduate degree from Southern Cal was in international relations. Editing, writing was something that was very familiar to me. So I was fascinated by the whole process. And eventually I got his book and he autographed it. And backing up to that moment, I was just intrigued by the whole world of running was getting bigger. People were writing books. They were getting older, but they were running well. And the marathon was important. Just so much was happening around me that I was completely intrigued. Meanwhile, I was in this very successful career after about 3.5 years working for a company that put on hiring conventions. I had been traveling around the Southeast United States, giving talks to separating junior military officers because the military was shedding a lot of its officer corps because they didn't need them anymore. War was over. So these young junior officers were great candidates for business and industry. They would go to them for free. The companies would pay us a fee to hire these people. So it was free to the participant. We got paid. The company was happy. It was a very successful business model. I was learning to be a public speaker because I had to give these job search seminars, which eventually the military, while I was in the reserves, asked me if I would make training tapes, which I did, which I still have copies of, which they used around the world in military bases to help people understand how to write a resume and all this other junk. I liked being in front of people and I liked being on a microphone. That was interesting to me. But what I really liked was that running store idea. One day I told my wife then, who's still a good friend, I said, we're leaving. I was making substantial amount of money and was living large. Had built a house. I had everything you could possibly want. And I was enjoying my running so much. I was competing, not great, but I was starting to run under 33 minutes for 10K. Life was good. So we're moving to Colorado. I'm going to open up a running store. And she said, what? Wait, what? And so I said, yeah, I can see it. It's the future. Running is going to become big. And I want to be a part of that. And she said, oh, that's all our money. It's going to go into a running store. So we did. We moved to Denver at the end of August, 78. It was reality therapy 101. I was terrible at business. but I was good at public speaking. I loved having people come into the store. It was a small store named Fidipides. I had training sessions and I would get people to come and talk to the runners there. It was, I think, the golden age. I really do believe this. I've seen it all now over 5 decades. That was the golden age because I had Jim Fix come in and talk to runners, Bill Rogers.
Wow.
I knew these people, Mary Decker. She was working for Shorter and he was pissed. Later on, he told me that I didn't like the idea that Mary came down and did a talk for me.
They were over in Boulder, right?
So Boulder's about 45 minutes away. And I had gone up to Shorter's store. I just wanted to meet him. I didn't realize that he would see me as a business competitor. And so I walked in and said, "Hey, is Frank here?" And they said, "He's busy. He's in the back." Because I guess millions of people would want to come meet him. I was a little offended. And here was this young woman who went to University of Colorado working in the store, Mary Decker. And I had met her 2 months earlier at a running camp that Jeff put on outside Atlanta. I think it was in a forest setting, but I think a hard Labor Creek camp or anyway, but it was a distance running camp. And there were amazing runners there. Jack Daniels was one of the lecturers there. I think Bob Anderson, who wrote the original book on stretching, was there. Obviously, Jeff was there. And it was very much a rural setting in the sense that not quite like barracks, but similar. And there was an outside wash basin where you would brush your teeth. And I think we had outhouses. I don't remember, but you got to run with these great athletes. And I could run with Mary Decker. I was good enough to run with her. I'd never experienced a woman that fast. So when I went into the store, there she was. And I thought, "Oh, it's so nice to see you. Would you be interested in coming down and speaking to runners at my store?" And she said, "You have a store?" I said, "Yeah, it's way southeast Denver called Fidipides." And she said, "Sure." So she did. She came down. And after she spoke, I gave her a pair of Jeff Galloway had his own running clothes, Fidipides running clothing. And I gave her a pair of black shorts that had white stripes down either side. There was a mesh. And because she went to CU, black and so on. She wore them in the National Cross Country Championships when she won. And the picture got on the front cover, I think, of Sports Illustrated. And Frank was livid because he also had his own thing, but she liked those shorts. She was doing a talk at a rock and roll race here in Denver at a symposium that they had as part of the expo. And I brought that up to her and she remembered that. Yeah, she said, Frank wasn't happy about that. So I had all these great people speaking at my store. And the store did fine until I expanded it into a bigger store and then sub-franchised. And then by the grace of God, I didn't go bankrupt. But I had to make money. So I had gone as a volunteer to another race in Denver. The Rocky Mountain Roadrunners were putting on races. They were the running club. They put on all the races. I was a volunteer and I saw how they did it. And I said, I wonder if I put on races. I could put on races. I can organize. I was an officer in the Army. I can do this. At the same time, I realized they had to register. Back then, you just mailed in your registration. I said, what if I created a system where they come in the store and register in person? So I went to all these races and said, I could be a registration location for you. This was a novel idea back then. So I got traffic because I couldn't afford to pay for advertising. And it saved me. That foot traffic saved me, kept my stores going until I could get rid of them finally. But that's another story.
So were you not getting paid for the registration? It was just a promotion for your stores?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I didn't care. They walk in. My job was to convert that walk-in into a purchase. And that's also why I did the clinics, the talks in the evening at my stores. It's why helped start the Pheidippides Track Club, which still exists today. Another guy and myself, I wish I could remember his name, but anyway, I made him the president. It was my Pheidippides Track Club was my running club. And I did it because we would run from the store. So I'd have all these people on a Saturday milling around. These were all survival techniques. I loved doing it and I loved camaraderie, but it was more survival.
The genesis was to keep the business afloat. That's great. Let me ask you about just one particular person, because he's long gone. He had an impact with a whole generation or two of runners, James Fix. What was he like?
The reason I was so taken to him was because he was from the county that I grew up in. I think he lived in Greenwich. I could be wrong. It could have been Stanford, and so I think how did I first meet him? It was like how I first met Arthur Lydiard. I think I met him through Jeff Galloway. I'm almost positive. I knew he was coming to Colorado to do a promotion for his second book. I wrote to him. Back then you wrote letters. I wrote to him and I said, when you come to Colorado, please come to my store. I'd love to meet you. And we'll promote your book too. He had a publicist and I get a notice that, hey, Jim Fix is going to come by your store on Tuesday afternoon. He did. And there were a few people there because I couldn't organize it quickly enough. He said, hey, look, I got to drive around the town to go to these different places. Why don't you just join me and we'll just hang out? So, sure. I jumped in his limo and they drove us around to different places. I think we went to Shorter Store too, which pissed him off. And he was a great guy, just full of life and just was like he'd been rescued by this sport. He changed his complete lifestyle. He was like the Pied Piper. He wanted everybody to know how this was such a wonderful activity. He was so grateful. I still have a letter from him thanking me for including him in his life during that short period of time, which I never forgot. We would actually do long distance phone calls every once in a while and talk. So when he finally passed away unexpectedly in mid stride, I took that very personally. I think a lot of people that met him felt like you meet somebody, it's like you've always known them. And Jim Fix was that kind of a guy, not unlike Arthur Lydiard, which takes me back to 78 when I met him.
Yeah, I just chatted with a guy named Tom Abbott who worked for Converse for a couple years.
Yeah.
With Arthur Lydiard for a while at some shows at the New York marathon shows. Tom Abbott was a Converse rep. So he was extensively sold on the Lydiard method and spent a couple years overlapping with Arthur. How did you know Arthur?
Again, Jeff Galloway. I was in Atlanta and Jeff had sponsored Arthur to come in and talk. And Arthur was promoting his book, Running the Lydiard Way. Another great example, I would have these books that were autographed in my running store and people could check them out. Both that and John Parker's book were both never returned. Out there, little karma, but I'd love to have my books back, people. Those are me. Anyway, Arthur was speaking about how to train. I went, this made perfect sense to me. Long, slow distance, and then hill repeats. I embraced that. And Arthur was a fabulous storyteller and speaker, just extraordinary. And he coached John Davies, and he just an amazing person. John Davies became John Sinclair's coach, a great runner from that I became the agent for, and still one of my closest friends. There's a guy you should interview sometime. I never forgot that. I got an autographed copy of his book. And about 2 or so years later, early 80s, I asked Arthur if I wanted to put on my own running camp in a metro area. What I did was I just asked these different athletes that I knew, who I was also the agent for now, because I became an agent in the early 80s. One of the first ones to become an agent, ironically. But Ann O'Dane, John Sinclair, I might have had Mark Weeks. I'm trying to think of these different people that I assembled to give talks. And Arthur Lydiard was one of them. You couldn't have as great a group as I had assembled just because I knew them all. And they all agreed. And I think I gave them each $100 or something. And it was just insane. It was just the golden era. But Arthur was one of those. And a curious story, when Arthur was there, he was staying at my house. This is a story worth hearing, promise you, because it's true. I told my buddies that, hey, Arthur Lydiard is coming and is going to stay at my house on Saturday. Why don't you come over and we're going to do a little training run with Arthur and you get a chance to meet him. And I think the running camp was a week long and it was going to start the next day or something. So they all assembled and we ran. One of my friends at the time was a guy, I won't say his last name, but Chris. And Chris, good runner, a really good runner. And we finished up. We're now, oh, and by the way, my neighbor 2 doors down was Anthony Sandoval. Now, Dr. Anthony Sandoval, 80 Olympian that didn't get to, he would have won the Olympics. I'm quite sure of it. I was a sparring partner. I trained with him on his slow days. He would be running to the hospital where he was interning, and I would try to keep up with him for the first few miles. Occasionally, I would do long runs with him. But anyway, he was my neighbor. So we're all on the lawn, stretching, beautiful morning. And Chris says to Arthur, your running shoes, what were they called? E.B. Lydiard's. He had his own running shoes. And he said, I think they're not quite, they started to tell him about some part of the shoe that he didn't like. And I'm going, this is Arthur Lydiard. You don't criticize my guest. And I said, Chris, and I said, this is Arthur Lydiard. Come on, give him a break. I think his shoes are great. Be quiet. And Arthur looked at him and said, you're wrong. My shoes are great. I'm right. And that's that. Turned on his heel and stormed into the house. I said, Chris, great. Way to go. You just insulted my house guest who's a coach at my running camp, which you didn't pay to go to. So you getting this fun, free run. I was really ticked. So I went inside to try and make amends. And I walked in through the kitchen door, through the kitchen. Arthur wasn't there. Walked through the dining room, wasn't there. And then I looked, we had a sort of a family room sunroom at one, about 2 steps down. And there with his back to me, sitting on the floor, was Arthur. And with him was my daughter, who was 4 or 5 years old, who's now, by the way, the international customer experience director for Ford for all electric vehicles. But at the time, she was 4 or 5 years old. And she's lecturing him because they were playing fish. And she's insisted, you cheated.
Oh my gosh.
And I'm going, oh God, this is just one disaster after the other. And Arthur said, I'm so sorry. What did I do wrong? And she said, you did this instead of this. She said, I'll do it better next time. Can we continue to play? Tiptoed out. And then I realized, there's the man. There's the gentleman. And for that moment, I forever was grateful that he was my friend.
I don't know if I'll put this in, but I'm going to ask you. Did you have beer in your house? I think Arthur certainly liked beers.
Yeah, we always had beer. Beer and wine. But he liked beer. Yeah, but he didn't like American beer particularly, but he definitely liked beer. he was almost curmudgeonly, very definite in his point of view. Arthur Lydiard knew coaching, knew athletes so well. It was just amazing. And that's why people would go to New Zealand in the wintertime to train either with John Davies or Lydiard or somebody that was a disciple of Lydiard. He had it figured out. That's why John Sinclair and Ann O'Dane became such great distance athletes. They were both very good, but Arthur Lydiard, through John Davies, made them great runners. I mean, they became the two dominating American distance stars for a decade in America. And I think his had a profound influence on millions of runners and coaches.
I want to ask you, I want to also go back to John Parker and his book, just because, and there's something I always wondered about this. Did you talk about the content? So that, okay, yes. Frank Shorter's in the book.
Yep. Jeff Galloway's, they're all in the book in different personalities.
There's another name he used the real name of. Do you know who the second guy? I know who it is.
Was it
this is quizzing you. Sam Bear.
Oh, yeah, Sam Bear. Yeah. Oh,
Sam Bear's in that book with his real name, but he's not in there. He's just, the Sam Bear. So, some of the other guys, including, I think, a New Zealand runner in there under disguise.
Yeah. I mean, that book's well worth going back and dusting off and reading. You just made me remember another thing that Jeff Galloway's, I always enjoyed interviewing him on stage over the years because I would bring up things that he didn't want me to bring up. Like he was a Navy officer off the coast of Vietnam. When I was in Vietnam, he was off the coast, but he never talked about his military service. But there was Bobby, I think of a guy, 68 Olympic team, 5,000 meters for America. Why can't I remember his name?
Bob Day.
So Bob Day was a guest of Jeff Galloway's at his house. And this is probably the summer of 78 or a summer of 77. Jeff was living out near a Civil War battlefield. He would run in that battlefield. They had great trails in that battlefield area. And Jeff called me and he said, would you like to run with Bob Day in May tomorrow morning? I said, really? Because I knew who Bob Day was. And now it's two Olympians. I said, sure. He said, be at my house at 6:30 in the morning. 6:15, I'm parked in his driveway at Parade Rest, standing there waiting. And Bob Day, no. Yeah. Now, Jeff Galloway walks outside to get milk out of the milk box, back then, milk bottles. And he said, what are you doing standing out here? Come on in. I went, if that's okay? He was sure. So I walk inside and there's Bob Day and they're having coffee. Jeff liked to have coffee before he ran. So I get to meet these two Olympians. Now I'm going to go for a run with them. My greatest concern was that they would drop me and I'd get lost. It was going to be a 7 or 8 mile run. So we start running and we've gone about 2 miles. And I don't know how to say this delicately, but I hear this sound. It sounded like a frog or something. Wasn't sure what it was, but I wasn't going to say a word. Jeff said, did you hear that? And Bob says, what was it? He said, that's a barking tree spider. I said, barking tree spider? I said, what's a barking tree spider? And we're keeping running. And I hear it again. There's another one. I said, they sound close. And he said, yeah, you don't want them to jump onto you because they can have bad bite. But after a while, they just started laughing. They couldn't stop laughing. And I realized that I had just been taken in the inside joke, which I've used periodically in my running career since. But they didn't drop me. They had nonstop conversation. I wish I had a recording of that conversation because the Olympics were in their near past. If you think about it, this was 68 and 72, and they knew everybody and everything. And so I always remember that as one of the archetypical training runs that I was so blessed to be able to do. When you get to do things like that, you don't take them for granted. And I never did. Running with Ann O'Dane and on training runs. For a period of time, I represented Uta Pippig, and before she fell out of grace, and helped her buy her first house and with a tax trust. But anyway, the point is, I would go on training runs with her and just said, I got to pinch myself. How do I get to do this? I get to do things that no one else gets to do. And I was so immensely grateful that this sport was given to me by all these circumstances that blended into my career that otherwise I would never have been able to do. And I took them for granted sometimes, but as I got older, I recognized the value of them.
Yeah. We've just met for doing this interview, but it's obvious your nature of gratitude and good nature has probably contributed to people trusting you, quickly connecting and relating to you and saying, yeah, come on in.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I always said in reflection, if I'd only had a guest book at wherever I lived, that the people that have stayed at my home, different places for the past 40 some years, would be a who's who. Arthur just being one, but Herm Atkins was another, Dr. Herm Atkins. I can remember my children were fascinated by him because it was the first person of color they'd ever met. And here he was staying at my house. And we as runners, we took these things for granted. We were colorblind. We just didn't care. Not only is he a doctor, but he's fast. And so I was Anthony Sandoval when I would run with him, but he just 2 houses down. But we would run with him and on long training runs, and he would always negative split. So we could run with him for maybe 10 miles on a 20-mile run. And after that, he would literally excuse himself and then just gone.
Let me ask you about the other community, the rival community